We thank you guys so much for coming. I heard my sub did great, Jamie. He is more talented than you guys even know that he is. He's normally behind the scenes, but the boy gets it done in so many different ways. So I'm glad y'all had that opportunity to learn from him, and he could come up and do this every week. He's great, real smart. And so I think I don't have anything left to teach you guys on Buddhism. I think he covered it all, but we want to at least just go through it. I know that you had the readings for. In fact, if you're doing this while we start really quick, I want everybody to pull out your phone really quick. If you have a phone on you, let's pull it out. We're going to do a little exercise here. How many of you have a phone on you that is made by an Apple? Raise it up really high. Raise it up really, really high. The person who made this was a Buddhist. Didn't realize that. In fact, and for the rest of you, if you have any kind of other type of smartphone, not that I'm like a big like iPhone or else, but all these other smartphones, if you have one, sort of, this was the first one, and everybody started jumping on and start copying this. And so every time you talk on the phone, you're being influenced by Buddhists. No, I'm joking. Steve Jobs, who was the founder and president of Apple for a long time, was a Buddhist for a very, very long time. And if you think about his life and some of the ways that he did things, it makes a lot of sense. And it's sort of this deal of you determine your own reality. You make things better. You work this way out. And so he was a Buddhist until the day that he died, and was very much was a pretty good Buddhist. One of the most, some people say the greatest coach that has ever coached any sport whatsoever is a very famous Buddhist. He coached the likes of Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal. Does anybody want to take a guess who that'd be? Phil Jackson is a Buddhist, and a lot of times what he does is he uses Buddhist tactics to work with these teams to say there's a lot of chaos in your mind, and I want to still your mind so that you can react on a moment's decision in the right way. And so there's a lot of meditation and kind of practices. He doesn't necessarily make everybody do Buddhist rituals, but that's sort of the framework that he goes into. In fact, if you look up, I just did this for fun before I got here. I wonder who's the most famous Buddhist you can find. Almost a ridiculous amount of Hollywood celebrities are Buddhist. Some of them I don't know. I used to know people. I don't know people anymore. But there were some that stuck out. People like Richard Gere, Buddhist. Who are some of the other ones? I don't even know. Tina Turner is a Buddhist. She said that was sort of what helped her get through an abusive relationship. There's just a list of these, and in fact, what you see, I think, Brad Pitt is a Buddhist. Angelina Jolie is a Buddhist. Bill Clinton, it says now he's a Buddhist. George Lucas, who created all the Star Wars films, is a Buddhist, and that sort of happened out of a lot of the stuff that he would create. And so you see this, and what you find is a lot of people, honestly, Buddhism is a good world religion for those that don't want to have to deal with a question about God. So if you want to be religious and not necessarily be labeled as an atheist, Buddhism is a really good way to go, because you can basically do what? You can chart your own path, right? Any direction. Is there a standard line for Buddhism? No. There's one guy who started it, and his path can help you, but it's not necessarily going to dictate the way that you go on. This weekend, I got to speak at a conference in Easley, and the first time I went, I got my little Buddhist device here, and put in the address for First Baptist Church, Powdersville, and it took me. It says, "Do you want to take the toll road or not?" And I looked to see what kind of change. I said, "Okay, well, that'll help me save a little 10 minutes on the drive." So I took the toll road, but when I came back, I didn't have the change, and so I didn't want to use the card. So I said, "Well, I'm going to go down a different direction." I went back and forth to Easley. I took the trip 6 times this weekend, and I think I went a different way every time. I don't know if you know that, but from Greenwood to Easley, you can do that. Okay, and I just I'll try this. I'll go down this road. Let's see what happens. And Surrey would be like, "Where are you going now?" And I'm like, "Come on, wise one, teach me." And so you would go, and then I eventually ended up there every time. And really, that's a great picture of what Buddhism is. It's look, you can take this path and go that path, whatever. We're going to end there. That's the goal, is nirvana. It's enlightenment. It's to achieve that. But you can go any way that you want to. It's fine, completely fine. And in fact, one of the main things is don't let anybody else's experiences dictate what you experience or the path that you're going on, which makes this such a great religion for somebody who wants to say, I want to figure this out on my own. I don't want God to have to tell me what to do. Because really, when you look at Buddhism, if you notice this, who is the ultimate authority? We are. I mean, it's honestly, you see why a lot of people who say, I don't want to really have to deal with the question of God, maybe there is, maybe there isn't, this is a very, very good option for them. Because especially, it doesn't put you in a box, does it? Even at Hinduism, while it's a little bit more loosely, it's a little bit more boxed in, and Buddhism is just very much sort of free-for-all, wherever you want to go. And that is what's very difficult about talking with someone about it, because it really is, you're the standard. You make up the path, you go whatever direction you want to. So as you were doing your reading, if you have your book, I want you to turn to page 90. And hopefully, I know that as Jamie talked through Siddhartha's story, it sort of helps you understand Buddhism in a more broad way. But as you've read some of these teachings, I know some of these teachings are real easy to sort of follow on to, and some of them are like, what in the world's going on? But once again, this is a guide. This is one man's guide. And just as a way of review, do Buddhists worship Buddha as God? No, they do not. So if anyone ever says, "Oh, that Buddha statue's a god," it's not. It's not really a thing at all. In fact, if you did your reading, you'll notice that making a Buddha statue is just sort of giving you some brownie points for the next life, if anything. You're not worshiping as God. You're just sort of making this image in a religious way. So if we look at page 90 on the past lives of Siddhartha Gautama, and it says that as he basically, once he attained Buddhahood, which just sounds like I don't know. I'm not going to be a Buddhist, but that just sounds cool. You attain Buddhahood. But anyway, once he attained it, he could realize that he had lived 550 lives before this. And he had memory of all these lives. Now, that's not a standard practice of everybody who would say, hey, I've reached that enlightenment. I've gotten to that place where they all can. But Siddhartha said that he could. And so he starts telling some of these stories from his previous lives. In fact, as you read it, you sort of see like it's just sort of like it honestly, when you read it, sort of sounds like some kind of like child story that you're just reading. Is there a point to this? There's like a moral, and then it's sort of like a moral of the story. If you go to page 92, there's sort of this summary. The next to last paragraph, what does it say? Behold the fruit of sacrifice, virtue and piety. A serpent in ship shape conveys the good man o'er the sea. Make friendship only with the good and keep good company. Friends with the good, this barber could his home in safety see. And really it's just sort of like this random story about a barber and some kind of serpent king on the sea. And by the way, choose good friends. Now let me tell you about my next life. And that's sort of what it is. And it's just sort of like a bunch of stories that he says this happened, a few lives ago. And he just sort of brings it about to sort of show, hey, if you reach this status, if you get to this level, you're going to be able to understand all this as well. And that's one of the questions that people always ask about Hindus and Buddhists. Do they know their previous lives? And depending upon if they've reached it or not, or what they say, there would be some that say, oh yeah, before this, I was of this. And they'll tell you a story about it. And if you're like me, you're really skeptical and like, you're just making that stuff up. But also, you guys know this, that sometimes you've told a story so many times that sometimes it's hard to tell what's true and what's not, isn't it? You just keep rehearsing it in your mind, and it sort of grows and stretches. And so I think a lot of times what happens is that. And so there's all these different stories, and he shares all these different ones. And once again, I think if you look down at that last page, and I know that on the last paragraph there, that last sentence, on that occasion, the converted lay brother attained nirvana. And I know that Jamie talked about this at all, but for some of you that know the musical group that came out in the 90s that were so, it was a genre-changing, really big group. Kurt Cobain and Nirvana was a huge, huge group. Changed music for a long, long way. And if you remember Kurt Cobain's story, how did it end? Suicide. And you just think about this guy who was riddled with depression, drug use, trying everything in life. And it breaks your heart to think that was his band's name. To say that's what he was attaining. He was hoping for. I want off. I want this to stop. I want the suffering to stop. That's what I'm looking for. And then eventually he would take his own life. And so whenever I even see this, I see how tragic it is for someone to say, yeah, because if you think about Buddhism as a whole, it's very logical, isn't it? Well, life is hard. You suffer. It's difficult. Get off of it. Do better things than worse things. That's the goal of life. That's all it really comes down to. And so when you think about that, you think about these people that are suffering and just wanting something out of the way. When you look at on page 93, the Four Noble Truths, could you see how this sort of works out? This is sort of a sermon where he is giving out and getting these noble truths. And looking at this first full paragraph, thus have I heard. Once you look down about midway, it says, there are two extremes, O monks. Do you see that section? There are two extremes, O monks, which the man who has given up the world ought not to follow. The first is the habitual practice of those things whose attraction depends upon the passions. This is especially true of sensuality. It is a low and pagan way, unworthy, unprofitable, and fit only for worldly minded. Second is the habitual practice of asceticism, which is painful, unworthy, and unprofitable. And then he says there is a middle path. So what he kept seeing was, here's all these people who are indulging in anything and everything they can have, and then these religious people who are doing the complete opposite and saying, no, we're just going to deny ourselves of any food, of any pleasure, of anything this world has to offer. And he goes, there has to be a middle way here. And he's like, that's what you need to search for here. And so what you see a lot of times is, in fact, if you saw in some of the imagery, I'm trying to think if there's the pictures, if we put it in here or not. I don't think I put this one in here. A lot of there'll be some of the images that if you see of Siddhartha Gautama, oh no. All right, keep your finger here and turn over to page 103. To page 103. What do you notice about Siddhartha there? He's starved. So this is when Siddhartha is trying the ascetic way. All right, I'm just going to deny myself food. I'm going to deny myself pleasure. I'm going to deny myself money. I'm going to deny myself see how this is. And so in some of the pictures you'll see of him, you'll see his ribs, and he'll look very emaciated. And then what's interesting is when you see a lot of Buddha statues, what do you notice that a lot of times about their size? They're fat and smiling, right? They're just like, oh, life is good. This is awesome. I even got my shirt off. It's just like enjoy. And so it's just weird because some people say, well, that sort of looks like gluttony, but what it's supposed to look at is like, hey, I'm just content. Everything's good. We're just enjoying life. It's not there. It's not there. And so, go back page 93. Once again, he talks about the middle path. He talks about the noble eightfold path, and there he lists them out. He says, this is to say right views, right aspirations, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right contemplation. And so if you think about if I were to ask you, how is a Buddhist going to attain this? It's all based upon you, right? It's not based on anything that a God or anybody's going to do for you. This is completely on your ability to figure this stuff out and to do this. And one thing I want you to note, through this, when he has those 8 things, and you turn over the page 94, first full sentence there says, any craving that is unsatisfied is painful. Now, if you just listen to that, like, I was rereading through this stuff this afternoon, and I thought to myself, I could take that line, and I could put it in a lot of Christian living books today, and you guys would read it and go, that's a good line. I mean, if I'm being straight, wouldn't you agree with that? Any craving that is unsatisfied is painful. That is I don't disagree with that. I mean, if you have a craving for something that's unsatisfied, it produces pain in for you. And so what happens about Buddhism that is so tricky is there's a lot of stuff that's just, I wouldn't say it's necessarily wisdom, it's just observations. But it's a spiritual observation. So a spiritual guru says, hey, any craving that is unsatisfied is painful. And celebrities and politicians and people, men and women alike, go, yeah, that's right. I'm always wanting more, and it's just painful when I don't get it. And it's not fair that they have it and I don't. And it sort of brings them in a little bit. Just sort of literally just starts bringing them in. And then he says, in brief, the 5 aggregates that spring from attachment, the conditions of individuality and their cause are painful. This, amongst is the noble truth concerning suffering. He's saying, he's basically like, you're suffering because you desire and you want too much, and you just got to sort of kill those desires in you. And so it goes on and through it and continues talking through that. Any questions about this section right here, this reading that you had, that you made a note? Anybody raise their hand anytime. I'm not wanting to fly through this, but I'm also not wanting to labor it either. Yes, ma'am. Say that again. Ladies of the red dot, that's Hinduism. Yep, that's right. It depends on which area of Hinduism you're talking about. It's just like a dressing. I mean, it's just like sort of a symbol of like, it's almost like a cross around the neck. It just sort of identifies. So, yes. Did you have a question?
Kind of a question and a statement too. I found in the whole reading that, it's similar to our, there's so much wisdom, and I made notes all throughout it, like, yeah, that would be something in Proverbs.
Right.
There's similar.
Yep.
So was there a Christian influence anywhere along the way?
Yeah, so when you read Buddhism, great point, Susan, that you said you read a lot of these sermons and you go, that almost sounds like Proverbs. Some of this sounds like it could come straight out of the book of Proverbs. And so what are the influences there? And I don't know if any of you guys, you've ever seen some of this stuff where people say the golden rule is in every world religion at some level, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And so, are people borrowing stuff or doing stuff? And I think what it comes down to is this, Buddhism in particular, even if I know certain atheists that would not say they're Buddhists, but they live like this. Well, just have good speech. And I say, well, what does that mean? Well, just have right speech. Well, tell me, what does that mean? And they say, well, don't say this, do say that. I go, okay, based on whose standard? Because I think you should probably say that versus that. So when you look at this, it's very subjective. All of the teachings that Buddhism is going to give us is very subjective. So it works for you, may not work for me, and that's okay. So it's not obedient words. It's not obedient lifestyle, obedient thoughts. It's right. It's right thoughts, right concentration, right mindset, right. You're going, what exactly does that mean? You define that. You interpret it. So there are a lot of similarities through that, but really it comes down to it's sort of like in certain cultures where they haven't been influenced by any of these world religions. Like there's certain cultures that you'll go to in the world that Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam has not even touched. And they'll still say, you know what, you need to do to other people what you'd want them to do to you. That almost shows to me more like the moral compass that's on all of us, that moral law we talked about. That just there's certain things that we just know and we just go, that's right. We might interpret it differently, but what Buddhism does is just sort of has this very subjective, overarching thought about it, saying you determine that. Does that make sense? Great question. Does somebody else have one over here? Okay. Yes, sir. Japanese culture is very heavily influenced by Buddhism, because for a long time, Japan and China, which is really weird because, atheism is sort of the religion of China, which is why Buddhism works there. It's allowed versus where Christianity is going to be pushed back on, because Buddhism's more you are the God versus there's a God telling you what to do. And so China will allow Buddhism, and so you'll see a lot of Buddhist statues in China. In Japan, Buddhism is very heavily influenced because if you think about Japanese people, they are all the time, just work hard, do this, get enough, blah, 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 especially for some of you that work with Fuji, and a lot of these families they're just some of the most hardworking people, and yet if you really get down to it, some of the most depressed people because they're just trying to achieve this and work hard and this kind of stuff. And so Buddhism is very heavy. But in Japan also, Shintoism is very big. But Shintoism basically is this. It's more like it's more patriotism than anything. It's like the religion of Japan. It's not necessarily like, it's a weird kind of mixture of a lot of stuff, but it more has to do with like the emperor of Japan and the entity of the country and that kind of thing. And so Buddhism and Shintoism can sometimes just go in tandem with one another. But Buddhism is very, very big. You'll see a lot of Buddhist statues in Japan. And I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but what you'll see is you'll see a Buddhist statue in Japan. And I remember being at one that was just gigantic, and it was like it was a female Buddha with a baby in it. And you would go there if you either could not conceive or you had aborted a baby. And you would sort of do a ritual around that. In Japan also, there are normally neighborhood temples that you go to. And what you'll do is, in fact, when last time I was there, we were at a place and like the kids were coming back off the train from school, and before they'd go home, they'd go in their school uniform and they'd walk into the temple. They'd throw some money in there. They'd clap their hands. They'd breathe in some incense, and then they'd walk out. And I was sitting there with one of my buddies, Yohei, and I said, Yohei, tell me about this. You used to be Buddhist, and now you're a Christian. What did you think? He said, I did this all the time when I was growing up. I said, why? He goes, it's just what you do. I said, do you believe anything was happening? He goes, no, not at all. And there's monks back there, and the monks bring out the food for the Buddha statue. And I was like, does anybody ever think he's going to eat it? No, not really. You just sort of do it. I was like, well, what happens to the food if the statue doesn't eat it? Well, the monks take it back behind him and eat it for him, kind of stuff. And so it's very heavily influenced, and especially if you think about, I don't know if y'all know, and I mentioned this, I think, a few weeks ago, but in Japan, they have the highest suicide rate of any country in the world. And a lot of that comes down from this mentality that you're trying to attain nirvana, and if life is bad, then the best chance for you to do is just start over. And that's why the train tracks behind the church that I stayed at for a month were stopped almost every night because a college student was throwing themselves on the tracks just to start over. And also, if you know this about Japan, one of the saddest things you'll see in Japan, they don't really have issues of crime there. I mean, they just don't. You'll see 5 and 6 year old kids get on a train in the morning and will have a 2-hour traveling distance to get to their university, and they go just in a group of kids and nobody's watching them. And I'm sitting there going, what in the world? And I'm going, number one, why are they traveling over this way? Well, because you start taking tests at age 5 that determine if you are of the smart kids, the medium kids, or the dumb kids, and there's all these different groups in it, and you will have to go across literally a city or cities to get to the school that you want to. And when you get to middle school, and at every stage there's just different, they keep separating people. And so what happens is there's this push, there's this drive to be right-minded and right smart and work hard and right concentration, right effort, so that you can achieve. And for them, if you don't get on that track of being in the right schools, you're sunk. You're completely sunk. And so that's why there's such a hard work ethic and pressure that they put on them, because at an early age, you are labeled as one thing. And so there's this huge mentality. Why it works really well in Japan is that you got to work hard and you got to try hard and you got to do this and you got to achieve. Does that somewhat answer your question? It's a sad place because once again, it's just ritual, but it's a perfect religion for that country. When I say it's because they're just, it's up, if it's going to be, it's up to me. I got to do this. I got to work hard. I got to achieve and kind of deal. And so for those of you that have, once again, with the Fuji influence in this community, some of you probably have seen that. And I know of friends that I've had that have come from Japan, and it's just, you're going to work hard. You're going to do this. And so it's just this intense drive for sure. So great questions. Turn over the page really quick to page 96. The Noble Eightfold Path. And this is sort of how it sort of tells a story. I know Jamie talked about the Eightfold Path. But if you look at it, you go down a few paragraphs there when it says, the Blessed One said, what monks, you see the next to the last paragraph, what monks is the Noble Eightfold Path? Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Now, some of you, I'll tell you why that you'd be somewhat interested in Buddhism. It's in a list. Some of y'all are wired that you're just like, I want a list. I want to check off, this kind of stuff. You're wired that way. And sometimes even in gosh, this morning when Jeff was preaching online, it's just like, he starts going to Leviticus and Proverbs this. I'm going, oh man, I thought I had this one down. Never mind, I don't. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper. But with this stuff, have a right view. Okay? Have a right view. What does that mean? Well, just you have a right view about life. Well, I think I do. Good. Next. That's the way it is. There's no concrete, it's got to be this or that. It's very abstract. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Proper belief, proper speech.
Right.
Here you're saying right.
Yep.
By what standard?
Right. And so what they're going to say is it depends on which reading that you're taking it from. Sometimes they'll say right, sometimes they'll say proper. And so it really comes down to this. It is just an issue of it doesn't need to be wrong. And once again, the question is, well, by whose standard, right? And so it does come to it. And I think what's interesting is Buddhism is really pointing to there is that moral compass on everybody's heart. It's hard to say, well, okay, you need to have right speech. And I think all of us here, there'd be certain things we automatically go, well, yeah. Like you grew up knowing certain things, and then you start reading the Bible and you know certain things. But there's an inherent thing about, you know what, there's certain types of speech that hurts people. And so they're just saying, if it hurts people, don't do it. And then you go, well, I've always, my hermeneutics professor in college always said this. He goes, sometimes it's not just what you say, but it's how you say it. He said, I'll give you an example. He said, go to your dog, if you have a dog at home, go to your dog and just get right up in his face and just with the meanest look that you have, say, I love you, come here, I love you so much, I want to give you a hug, and see what he does. He's going to run for his life. And then I want you to get him back and just say, I hate you. I'm going to cut your throat tonight when you go to sleep. I think you are the most smelliest, dirtiest thing I've ever seen. You understand me? And he's just going to be licking on your face and this kind of stuff. And he said, it's not only what you say, but it's how you say it. And so the Buddhist is going to say, yeah, so speak rightfully, speak properly. And you go, well, what does that mean? And it's open to your interpretation. Because once again, that's the difference. I mean, I think if you guys were a part of the gathering, and as we kept talking about how the Lord's Prayer is all about our Father, your kingdom come, it's all about give us our daily bread. There's this corporate thing. In Buddhism, if it's right for you, if it's proper for you, it doesn't matter if it's for us or our. It's right for you. It's your path. You decide, determine. So, great question. So when he goes through, once again, he sort of speaks of it. I mean, look at that last paragraph on 96. What is right view? It is knowledge with regard to suffering, knowledge with regard to the origination of suffering, knowledge with regard to the stopping of suffering, knowledge with regard to the way of practice leading to the stopping of suffering. So this first little thing is just basically say, you understand the tenet of Buddhism. Do you have it? Yeah. Suffering exists because I crave too much. I need to stop craving too much and achieve nirvana. Check. You got it. Okay, great. Next, what is right resolve? It's being resolved to practice renunciation, to be free from ill will, to be harmless. So you need to have the resolve to just stop your craving and desiring. And so once again, this is it's very subjective. It's very personal. But also that, like I go, okay, so I'm going to renounce certain things. Like, so what is that? How much do I renounce? It's sort of like, because there are times, y'all know the difference, like, okay, I'm a little bit hungry, and sometimes, like, I'm a lot of hungry. Like, there are people who are around me who think that bears are coming out because my stomach is rumbling that hard. Like, there's a difference level, and so, well, what's the level of craving or desire or want? And he's basically just saying, you just got to stop. You just got to stop, and that's very, very subjective. Turn the page over. You saw this chart here that comes together, but really, if you think about it, that Eightfold Path goes into 3 sections of wisdom, morality, and meditation. And so, once again, that sort of breaks down to this. So, once again, Buddhism is great for somebody who doesn't want to have to deal with the thought or the authority of God and just wants a simple checklist of, like, be a better person. In fact, that's why, honestly, I'd say there are a lot of quote-unquote Christians who are actually closet Buddhist. Honestly. Yeah, I'm trying to do better, and I don't try to do too much, and try to blah, 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 and I hope one day the good Lord's going to let me in. That's Buddhism. Really, if you think about it, that is a form of Buddhism, that, just do enough, say enough, do more good than bad, and so that's what comes down to it. The wisdom of the Buddha, the next passage there, just continues on, and if you look at that first paragraph, second line, if a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him, as the wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the carriage. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. Once again, that little line, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. I think I have read that in certain Christian living books. I have, and so once again, and some of you go, was that bad of a line? It's a observation that, how do we say it? You are what you think. or you are what you eat. I don't know, one of those things. Anyway, but there is that mentality of you're going to become what you think about, what you dwell on. And so once again, Buddhism, there's a lot of stuff that, once again, like Susan was saying, there's some wisdom there. There's some stuff, some observations that I wouldn't necessarily disagree with. The problem is that it's going to leave you only to a certain level. It's going to say, hey, life is about suffering, and you have these unmet desires and expectations. But the problem is this, is that you can't do enough good to achieve anything. And so that's where, obviously, Jesus is going to come in and completely change the whole dynamic here. If you turn over to page 101, the passage of founding the monastic order, and going on to page 102, just sort of insight into that time where he converts his 5 friends. That middle paragraph, give ear, O monks, immortality has been won by me, I will teach you. And so once again, this is sort of the idea. Hey, it's like, hey buddies, guess what? I tried this new diet plan. You got to try this out. I mean, this is what it is. He's just selling them on, I just had this experience. You need to have this experience too, but I can just show you the direction, but if you want to go a different way, but let me tell you where you're heading. That's where you need to get to. And these guys buy into it, and they go for it. And once again, I think what's so interesting about Buddhism, coming out of a Hindu culture, coming out of India really, for someone to start Buddhism in the middle of Hinduism, some Hindus took offense and thought it was heretical, and some were like, okay, whatever. For a lot of people who started to really think through and you guys, when we went through the Hindu teachings and where some of them were more laughable, you felt like you were just going, this just sounds ridiculous to me when you're reading this. Buddhism doesn't necessarily, the readings didn't sound that ridiculous to you as much as Hinduism did they? Hinduism almost felt like mythology to some of you. Buddhism sort of feels like, okay, sort of like a proverb or some kind of wise teacher today, this kind of stuff. And so what happens is, in the middle of this culture of Hinduism, somebody just says, I don't know if I buy all that. I think it's really just based on you got to think enough and figure it out, and you need to be enlightened to become a better person. And if God's help you do it, great. If they don't, disregard them. You chart the course. You go for it. And so once again, in that culture, it was birthed and works great in our culture today. If you look at page 103, the last line there, where he says to them, this is my last birth. I shall not be born again. So he's basically saying, I will not be reincarnated. This is going to be it for me. And I'm trying to teach you guys that different direction. And if you look through those next pages, it's going to talk about how different ones were getting it, and they're like, oh, I got it now. And some of these names that you're like, what is that? Those were some of the guys' names in there. And then the last line of that section on page 105, he says, then there were what? There were 6. Now there's him and 5 others. Now there's 6 of us. So the movement was growing, and then their responsibility was to go and find others as well. This next passage is on the merit of making images. Once again, it sort of teaches the importance of it. If you really turn to page 107, I want to highlight a section to you if you didn't get it, and really make sure that you get this next little thing. The first paragraph there says, it's talking about if you build an image, he says, I shall now tell you what his blessed reward will be and how he will fare in his next life. For a man who does these things, once again, a man who builds Buddha images, carves statues, he may be born again into this world, but he will not be born into a poor family. So he's basically saying is this, all right, if you make Buddha statues, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to reach nirvana and get off this reincarnation deal, okay? But we will guarantee that for doing this, you will not be born into a poor family, nor will be born into a barbarian border kingdom, nor into a lowly clan, nor as an orphan. He will not be born stupid or fierce. I just think it's funny those two things are together. I don't know how stupid or fierce. Like, oh, wow. Nor as a merchant or peddler or butcher. I think it's sort of rough. I mean, I didn't know butcher was that big of a deal. Okay, but apparently it was in this culture. Truly, he will not be born into any low, mean craft or impure caste. So once again, you see caste system is still being laid up into Buddhism here because it's offshoot into any heretical practices or heretical views. And so what this is a built-in guarantee that Buddhism was going to spread like wildfire based on how many images and carvings and statues that were going to go on. And in fact, you can go to stores in this town that we don't shop there a whole lot, not because of religious reasons, but I don't know how much of you know, like Pier 1 is just Buddha heavy. They're all over the place. I mean, you just see these little statues and they're like, oh, that's cute, and they're really, I guess trendy and whatnot, but I mean, just there are thousands of these Buddhist statues in that store, and you go to Target and different stores like that. Kmart has them. There's just these little statues, and it looks like some kind of ancient kind of like, oh wow, this is an ancient artifact. It's a Buddhist statue that, I'm not saying that Target is saying, hey, we hope we don't come back as a butcher, but they are saying, like, this is a good thing. And so what happens is you basically have created an advertising campaign to spread your religion very, very well. Because you just build these statues and you make them big in the square and you put them in your home and you put them over. You'll go into certain restaurants in this town. Especially even some of the Japanese restaurants, and you just sort of see like, oh, that's some Japanese artwork, and then you're going to see a little statue above a doorway or different things like that. And it's just sort of meant to sort of. Some of them would see it as a magical charm. Some of them just say, hey, we're just doing our religious duty just to try to make sure we don't come back as a this or that. Does it make sense? They're everywhere. They literally are everywhere, and sometimes I don't think we even notice how much. Turn over to page 109. This is... did anybody feel like you were floating when you read this passage? Just sort of like all over the place. And this passage is basically this. For someone to read this as someone is dying, to sort of imagine it's like someone is whispering in their ear going, turn left here. Now take a right here. You're almost there. You're going to reach it, and you're just trying to guide this soul in this intermediate stage like as someone is dying and trying to get them there. And so some, especially in the Tibetan Buddhism lane, will go down this path and just go through someone trying to guide them through this. And so it's a very, if you look at page 110, the second paragraph there. Noble son, for 3.5 days you'll be unconscious. And he's talking about like after someone dies, this kind of stuff, like for 3.5. I'm just going, that's really specific. Like for 3.5 days, not 4, not 3, it's 3.5 days you'll be this. And so and once again, when you look at this, you go, well, what authority are they getting this on? Well, this is somebody's experience, what somebody envisions, and they wrote it down. Everybody goes, okay, sounds good. And if that helps you, great. If it doesn't, throw it out. Rip the page out, don't worry about it. No harm done whatsoever. And so this is definitely, especially if we look at the next 3 religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they are very much religions of the book, okay, of their holy book. Buddhism, experience is key. Experience trumps book any day. And so that's what you always have to look at, think through. So any questions on Buddhism? I know that we could spend here for weeks, but anything that we've left undone before we jump into something completely different? Jamie just did that good a job, I know. You have a question? Yeah, so, and the temple is a great question. Do they have to donate to their temples? And most of these where there is a temple, you are going to pay an alms, you're going to give some money, you're going to do this. And so there's just sort of these collection plates. It's like a big bucket right next to this incense altar. And so it's sort of like, that's what you do. You throw it in there, breathe in some of the incense, you clap twice, and then you're out. And that's all. It's not like anybody's singing, it's not like anybody's reading anything. There's just a big statue with a gate around it, and you put some money in, and you breathe in some of the incense, clap your hands twice, and that's the deal. So that's sort of how they keep it up and keep the monks up as well in those different areas that does that. So, yep. Yeah, it is. It's a depending upon if there's different even sort of denominations of Buddhism, but yeah, they're going to be a very simple life. They're not going to be ascetics. They're not going to be like deny ourselves and we're not going to eat, this kind of stuff in certain ways would be. But they're going to have a very simple life. Just no desire, no craving. And so, in fact, that's why you would see a lot of monks dressed the same way every day. Why? Because if you have a wardrobe you got to pick out, then all of a sudden you're jealous of somebody else's wardrobe. If you know you're going to be wearing a yellow robe the rest of your life, it makes it pretty simple. So that's sort of how they do things. So, great question. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yeah.
Kids in Japan traveling at such a young age.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other, I'm just curious, like the crime rate, the kids traveling, that's all religion affiliated?
No, that's not all religion affiliated, and that's a great question, Eric. So when you go to Japan, there's a low crime rate. one of the main reasons there's a low crime rate is like if you steal in Japan, like you might be killed. Like there's not like a slap on the wrist stuff. And so Japan comes hard on crime. If you get caught doing a simple thing, you pay for it. And sometimes, I mean, it's serious consequences. It's not a night in jail and you're out. You get hit hard. And so there is such a level of discipline there that and some of it's based out of Buddhism, some of it's based out of Shintoism, some of it's just based on an emperor regime kind of deal. But it is really down to, you do crime, it's over for you. So you don't have it a lot in Japan, honestly. I mean, it's a low crime rate there. You just don't have that kind of stuff because you're going to get punished to the full extent. First time. Great question. Some of you are like, that sounds good. It definitely has some perks. All right, let's turn over to something completely different. Judaism. So we've looked at the polytheistic, really just big boy in Hinduism, and we went to Buddhism, that's sort of polytheistic and sort of, whatever. Now we're going to start looking at our big monotheistic religions, and there are 3, and all of them claim to have the same founder, and his name is Abraham. Okay, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all claim to have the same founder in the sense that he was the founder, the father of the faith. And so Abraham's sort of a linchpin for all these 3 religions. And if you look at it, here's how the order of them goes: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And in some ways, you sort of feel like they just keep adding stuff on to each one. The difference is what Christianity is going to do is they're going to say, we believe that that Jesus was the fulfillment of what Judaism was trying to do. Islam came in and said, I don't think that the Jewish text was right. I don't think the Christian text is right. But I want to use some of those people and say that it was actually this way. So when we look at these 3, there's going to be a lot of stuff. So in this kind of deal, you're going to read this, and some of you who took Old Testament with me last year, you're going to be like, I get this. And what we're going to read, you're probably going to go, yes and amen. I'm with most of that. The biggest deal with Judaism is this. The Old Testament that you have in your Bible, okay, Genesis through Malachi, it's offensive to call that the Old Testament to a Jew. Why? Yeah, that's all their Bible. They don't believe in a New Testament. It's sufficient. It's fine because they do not believe that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah. So it's even funny for me, and I've had the conversation not because I wanted to change it, but just to see how even things are wired differently. I'm to teach Old Testament at Lander. Like, that's the title. I didn't give it the title. They gave it the title. And even the title says something, doesn't it? Because I've had Jewish people in a world religions course, and to say Old Testament, what does that feel like to a Jewish person? It's a slap in the face, honestly. I'm not asking them to change it, but I'm going, whenever you say the words Old Testament, you are saying there is a new. You're inferring there is a new, that there is a completion to it. So as we go through this, we'll hear Old Testament, we'll hear Hebrew Scriptures, we'll hear the Hebrew Bible, and there's just sort of the Old Testament of it. And so what's different is they're still looking for their long-awaited Messiah. They do not believe that Jesus met the specifications. They are a religion of covenant. If you look on page 115, Judaism is a religion of covenant. The Jewish hope is their covenant with Yahweh through years of persecution and times of hardship. Jewish people hold fast to the belief that God has not forgotten about them. Their Bible is what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. They are the first of the major Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Still awaiting their Messiah, they believe that Jesus was a blasphemer and a false prophet. They do not accept his teaching or his atoning work on the cross. The picture above that you see on that page is something called the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, where it's on the temple, and where rabbis will come up and they'll read scripture really close up their face and wail and cry, longing for the return of the glory days, basically. The kingdom of David, the kingdom of Solomon, where they were this huge international player, and they had a king, and they had a temple, and they weren't in all this mess. Like, they're just saying, why? God, when? We've been through exile, we've been through slavery, our people have been through the Holocaust. When are you going to come back? And it's honestly one of the saddest things to sort of watch in that. Yes, ma'am?
What are they waiting for?
They're,
What are they waiting to see?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so for them, for the Jewish people, all of the Old Testament says that there's going to come one from the line of David, and his kingdom is going to be an eternal kingdom. And he's going to reign on his throne, and there's going to be somebody from his family that will be on the throne that will reign forever. And so at the time of Jesus and also today, what they were looking for was a king, somebody that would rise up, be a great politician, strategist, motivator, teacher, you name it. He was going to rally the troops, because if you think about Israel's history through the Old Testament, it was the time of David and Solomon where that was the kingdom. You know, at one time it was Egypt. At different times throughout, you get the New Testament, Rome is the big empire. But when you get to the time of David and Solomon, what do you see the Queen of Sheba coming to Solomon and saying, I need advice, like you're the wisest. You know, your kingdom is the best. And so they are longing for that time, because soon after Solomon, remember, the kingdom divides into Judah and Israel. And then both of them get flattened by an enemy. They both get taken into exile, and then just a remnant returns, and they try to rebuild the temple. And what happens to the rebuilding the temple? People keep tearing it down. Then they try to rebuild the wall, and people keep tearing it down. And then they have the kind of stuff that you read about and watch on TV today that they're still experiencing today. Just conflict after conflict after conflict. And they sort of see it as our lot is to suffer, but one day somebody's going to come rise up, and God is going to remember us and restore us, and we're going to be that kingdom on earth again. And so they are longing for, and so when they look at Jesus, Jesus is completely antithetical to everything they thought they were going to get. Here's a man born in a manger, not in a, kingly suite. Here's a homeless guy versus somebody. Here's a guy who's not going to fight, who's going to say, put down your sword. He's that kind of guy. And so it's just everything they didn't expect. And in fact, they were obvious that they thought Jesus was claiming to be the Messiah. And so the reason why they wanted to crucify him was because they thought that they were obeying Deuteronomy and Leviticus, that they were killing a man who was blaspheming. So they were doing their biblical right because they didn't feel Jesus met the profile.
But all the prophecies are in the Old Testament.
Right.
So they didn't maybe see it, but people
Right.
always saw it.
Yeah.
Is that such a strong book? I mean, they just need to see it.
Yeah.
It's such an
Yeah, I think that, I think you have to almost put it in this way. I don't know if y'all have ever, maybe this is me, but I imagine some of you have probably heard, you've been somewhere, somebody invited you to a service somewhere, and you heard somebody preach something, or you read something, or you saw something on TV, and they were doing it in the name of God, and it just infuriated you. I don't know if you ever felt that way. I have. I just go, how dare he stand up there on behalf of God and say that in front of people? And I just feel like I want to turn the tables over, and I mean, just lose my mind a little bit. Like I get so upset. And so the Jewish people, they felt that way. He's a liar, he's a blasphemer. And so we're going to even talk about that in a few weeks, about how Jews believe that Jesus intentionally tried to fulfill the prophecies of the Old Testament. That it was an intentional fulfillment. That Jesus, when he was old enough and he read enough of the scriptures, he thought, okay, so the Messiah is going to come into Jerusalem riding on a donkey. Get a donkey. Let's go. Okay, well, I got that somewhat. I can see somebody doing that. He's going to have sometimes some kids are going to praise him, and they're going to have palm branches. Okay, let's get some kids. Get all your kids here. Give them some palm branches. Ready, everybody watching this? Okay, intentional fulfillment. And I go, all right, makes a good, reasoning. And then you get to Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem, from you will come a Savior who will be born, whose beginnings are of old, from ancient times, and his throne will be forever. You can't really determine where you're going to be born. You can determine if you're going to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey, but you can't determine what you're going to be born. You can't determine that on your deathbed you're not going to have your legs broken, but everybody else is going to have their legs broken. You can't determine that your side is going to be speared. You can't determine that your feet are going to be pierced. Hands and feet are going to be pierced. So they're going to say, well, he tried to intentionally fulfill that, and his followers made up all this stuff. And it's very interesting. I've watched this video of a guy who is sort of an evangelist to Jewish people, and he'll get Jewish people and he'll get them together. And I'm gonna pull this up just to read it to you. He said, "Hey, I want to read something out of my scriptures to you, and I want you," and these people will say, they're Jewish, and they know that this guy's a Christian. Okay, they're aware of that. They're completely fine with that. They get that. And so what he does is, and he's done this many times, and it's very interesting how many times this is just, I don't know, they've gone completely the direction he thought he was going to do. He'll say, okay, here's the deal. I want you to listen to what I'm going to read. I'm going to read a passage of Scripture from my Bible, and I want you to tell me who you think this is about. Don't say his name. Just tell me who you think it is, okay? Okay. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of parched ground. He had no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried, yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. He was oppressed and was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, for the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke was due. His grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death, because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, he will see his offspring. He will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in the land. And it goes on from there, and he'll look at this Jewish person and says, this comes out of my scriptures. Who does this speak of? He goes, it's the description of Jesus Christ. He goes, interesting. Open up your Bible to Isaiah chapter 53. And they read it. And he goes, that's your scripture. And you just said that identified as the person of Jesus the Christ. And when you read it, that sounds New Testament, doesn't it? That sounds like somebody's describing what happened to Jesus. I mean, to the point of, okay, he's going to be broken and killed for our transgressions. He's going to be grave with wicked people on his side. In his deathbed is going to be the rich man, Joseph of Arimathea. All these different things. The lamb led to the slaughter. And it sounds like a New Testament thing, and it's Isaiah 53. Hundreds of years before Jesus is born. And so for us, we go, well, don't you see it? And they go, no. And they push it aside. And once again, because they believe very, very much so that that this is something made up and Jesus intentionally fulfilled. So here's what I want to do really quick. I want you to turn a couple pages over to page 122, okay? 122. We've got some readings here, okay? And for the next 2 weeks, you're going to be able to read stuff that's actually out of the Bible. So your assignment is not going to be some weird stuff about how gods are splitting themselves in half and how people are going to a barber and this kind of stuff. Like, you get to read the Bible. Everybody rejoice. Okay, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to read these Old Testament readings, and I believe these are some foundational readings, and you're going to know this stuff. You really are. But we're going to look at them as a Jewish person would see these readings. I want you to read them before we come. And then when we get here next week, we're going to start going through these notes together. And a lot of stuff, once again, you're going to know. But then we're also going to look at these readings from a Jewish context. And so once again, this is going to be a lot of stuff that you're going to read. And as a Christian, you're going to interpret and say, yes and amen. That's awesome. That's great. And they're still waiting. They are still longing, and they're still saying it's going to come. It's going to come one day. And so do those readings before we come. We'll do those notes, and we'll go through those readings together. And we're getting through it. Thank you, guys, and I will see you next week.